Hi, everyone. Welcome back to your second session on qualitative data analysis, specifically thematic analysis. This week, we are going to get deeper into different strategies to thematically develop your data. So we're specifically going to focus on what Johnny Saldana calls first cycle and second cycle coding strategies. So we're going to do some creative processes a little bit later on that involve using gerunds or action, also known as process coding. And we're also going to engage in an exercise called creating and developing found poetry, which some of you might be familiar with. And that's going to lead us to helping us develop more analytic memos. So we did a very basic analytic memo last time we met, where we were really focused on developing code definitions to really be able to develop a code book or framework that you will eventually overlay on your entire data set. But we're still working up to that. So this week, I'm going to give you more maybe complicated strategies after we really laid the foundation last week. So I am going to share my screen. Okay, so this is part 2. Okay. So we are going to develop our data analysis thematically. So last week I talked to you about the fact that we often use thematic analysis or themes interchangeably with category or category development. Okay, so we're going to talk about what Johnny Saldana refers to as first cycle coding methods. So what are they? So again, just as there are these different forms of numeric representations of statistics like whole numbers, fractions, percentages, etc., there are different forms of and methods of coding. And no matter what type of coding strategy you engage in, you can always move up levels more abstractly to develop themes. So in thematic analysis, there's no one way to get there. We just need a strategy. So I'm going to give you this week several options to see which one resonates with you personally as your researcher. Also, sometimes, let's say, descriptive coding works on maybe a very basic level qualitative analysis, but sometimes we might get into, let's say, process coding or gerunding when the analytic goals might be a little more complicated. So I am going to give you a buffet of options this week to kind of show you the scope. You can also combine some of these things. So sometimes I like to use descriptive coding, but then I also like to include some values coding, emotion coding, causation coding into maybe my descriptive coding. So we're going to go through each of these today. So at the most basic level, what I'd like you to really grasp as a part of this coursework is being able to just really assign labels to our data in the form of descriptive coding. So we're assigning labels to data to summarize a word or short phrase that's most often in the form of a noun or a topic on a passage of qualitative data. What this does for us is it really provides us an inventory of topics so then we can later on index and categorize, and that is how we develop our thematic analysis. This is appropriate for virtually all qualitative studies, but it's very handy for novice qualitative researchers to really learn how to code in a variety of forms. So an example, business, houses, graffiti, those are nouns that we can put onto our qualitative data. So this is a descriptive coding analysis, as you can see on what I'm looking at the left-hand side of the screen. We can sort of see that there is a passage that is about an environment that a participant is driving through, and the coder is just doing this descriptive level coding, applying nouns, buildings, graffiti, businesses. Oh, graffiti came up again. Let's put that in again. So we can also do this to develop kind of patterns in our data. We're going to work today with one of my favorite coding strategies, which is called in vivo coding. So in vivo coding is a very powerful tool. It's also become increasingly popular over the 2 decades that I've done qualitative research, because there's really a push for us to get closer to our participants' very words by using the very phrases that they use and then trying to define them. So sometimes our participants' phrases actually earn their way into our code book, and they really should, because we're also trying to learn the local language of our participants. That makes us really good researchers and connects us to our participants' words and meanings. So in vivo coding requires us to use words or short phrases from the participant's own language in the data records as codes. It may include folk or indigenous terms of a particular culture, subculture, microculture, and suggest the existence of the group's cultural categories. It's appropriate for virtually all qualitative studies. And the researchers, it really helps us learn how to code so we can prioritize and honor the participant's voice. I love that, to prioritize and honor the participant's voice. So this is becoming, in my opinion, really a demand. Like when I work with PhD students or doctoral students, I'm like, show me your code book. I would like some of these to be in vivo code so that you can show me that you are honoring your participants' voices and words. So in his work, Johnny Saldana uses some in vivo codes about children in the school system. So hated school, stopped caring. Okay, so here's an in vivo code example. So you can see left-hand side, this transcript, right-hand side, all Johnny Saldana is doing is pulling out participants' very words that have analytic traction. So hated school, freshman year was awful, this year's better, don't know why, stopped caring, hard to explain. Okay. The second step of this process to truly get the most like analytic oomph out of our in vivo coding is that we want to list the codes. We want to maybe play with them, order them. We can maybe put them in chronological order. We just want to see them all suspended from the transcript. We really want to figure out which one of these can we use as codes that we can attach definitions to. Okay. So you can see that there's another strategy you can use for handling in vivo codes called outlining codes. So you can see what he's done is really trying to attempt to categorize these in vivo codes. So let's look at the stopped caring kind of code schema. So stop caring includes what other people wanted, and then even within that, a sub-theme of have people like me trying to please them. Then again, found out stuff, wasn't trying so hard, wasn't trying as hard. So we can see that those have kind of been clumped or categorized together into a theme. Okay, so all of this is great, but we also need to be sure that we're writing about qualitative data analysis. So one of my very favorite mentors at UCLA, Mary Sue Heileman, said, you are coding too much. It doesn't matter. You can code till the cows come home. Your coding can be perfection, but as you're not writing about your analysis, you are not ever going to be done with your dissertation. And you're never going to be able to disseminate the knowledge that your participants have really gifted you with. So we always want to make sure we have a practice of memoing embedded in our coding exercises. So what I like to do is have a really deep coding session and then a really deep memoing session paired with that session. So this is Johnny Saldana working with the code I don't know. So you can see that he's really taken and suspended that code and then written about that. So maybe using a strategy like an 8-minute free writing exercise, which we did last week, and we're going to do a little more this week too. So this is one of Johnny Saldana's, in my opinion, greatest gifts to us as qualitative researchers who are learning from him. So I like to do this exercise with my class every year. What we do is we sit down. So I want you to use Topher's transcript again, which you have access to. Same transcript as last time. I want you to try to identify as many segments of in vivo codes throughout. So we're going to get to that a little bit later, but we're going to do our own found poetry in class today. So this is his example of found poetry. So you can see, just flipping back one slide or a couple slides, that all of these in vivo codes to the left-hand side have been suspended. Now it is time to order them in a form of a poem that we have found within the data to create really beautiful poetry. So this is the found poetry related to Johnny Saldana's data collection. This is one participant. Freshman year, awful, hated school. Over the summer, stopped caring about what others thought, found stuff out about myself. This year's better. Friends got closer, tried to know me, liked me more. Don't know why, kind of strange, hard to explain. This year is better. So you can see that just by suspending your codes, reordering them, you can really start to kind of understand your participants' words and how they fit together. Okay, but again, all of this doesn't matter if we're not writing up the results of our data. So I want us all to look at Topher's transcript. I want you to engage in first cycle coding. So I want you to identify all the in vivo codes you can. Then I either want you to do one of two things. You can create an outline where you're ordering them in categories and subcategories, which will help build your thematic analysis, or you can create found poetry with the in vivo code. So it's a choose your own adventure. Either you try to practice outlining coding or create found poetry with your in vivo codes. So again, I want you to, after that, engage in an analytic memo. So get your cell phone nearby, you set your timer for 8 minutes and just put pen to paper or just write as much as you can within the 8-minute time limit, nonstop. Don't worry about things. You can always go back and revise. Again, this is an iterative and emergent process, but I want to see if you can get to maybe a deeper meaning related to how all these codes maybe fit together. So looking for meaning, action, patterns. What does all of this mean? We're trying to get to that answer. So, all right, we're going to pause for a minute, pause my video, take out Topher's transcript and engage in this in vivo coding exercise, and we will catch up on the back end. Okay, we are back. So we are going to talk about another type of coding strategy. This is one of my favorites because I really think that it is the closest strategy that gets us to our philosophical underpinnings of interpretivist, constructivist, pragmatist, symbolic interactionist. It really sees us theoretically as human beings. We are actors, doers, thinkers, continuously engaged in a stream of action. And this has nothing to do with hypercapitalism, productivity, grind culture, us needing to do. It's actually looking at us as actors in our own human experience, even if the participant saying my choice was to do nothing, so I sat down and I took a nap. That is perfectly fine. We are coding that as making a decision to take a nap. So I don't want this to be linked to any sort of judgment that we have about our participants' productivity. We are just using this as a strategy to understand action. Our participants are actors in their lives. And that also gives them a lot of control over their own story too. So we use what's called gerunds. This is another word for ing words. So Johnny Saldana in his text and in the chapter that I gave you to read this week refers to this as process coding. So it connotates observable action and conceptual action. So observable action, riding a bike, conceptual action, setting a boundary. So you can see the differences between those two. So processes also imply actions. They're intertwined with the dynamics of time. So it gives us it tunes us to chronology. Such things that can emerge, change, occur within particular sequences are becoming strategically implemented. It's appropriate for virtually all qualitative studies. That's why I'm giving it to you as really thinking about a way to use gerunds or process coding to develop themes. It's important to know that this is particularly developed for grounded theory studies. However, I find my students find this to be the most important tool, even when not going for building theory or grounded theory study, but just trying to generate a descriptive, thematic, qualitative analysis. Okay, so examples are telling others, rejecting rumors, sticking by friends. So you can see that some of those are observable, telling others. Some of those are conceptual, like sticking by friends. Okay, so we can see we're looking for processes and observable and conceptual action. So teaching, what is the observable action? We can maybe, our teacher is telling us a story about taking attendance, lecturing, leading discussions, pretty basic. Conceptual actions are tougher because we have to conceptualize them. So if we're looking at, let's say, a theme of surviving, within that theme, wearing a protective shell, going with the flow, finding sanity islands, and maintaining an optimistic outlook. So these, again, are for Johnny Saldana's studies with teachers that work in inner city environments. You can see that process coding examples to the right-hand side. So things like rejecting rumors, not repeating what is said, rejecting ridiculousness, criticizing rumors, not caring what people think. So let's just go through the gerunds of that. Rejecting, repeating, rejecting, criticizing, not caring. Okay. So how do we use this for thematic construction? So what we want to do is raise these levels of conceptualization. So think about going back to Kathy Sharmaz's example from last week, just the bones. Our gerunds are bones. And now we need to cluster and categorize them into, let's say, these are our hand bones. Here are our foot bones. These are our neck bones. So we do that by trying to gather our gerunds together. So you can see, let's try like a more nuanced category. So maybe a theme of a reinforcement of loyalties. That's something quite interesting. Within that, we have the gerunds of finding out who your real friends are, learning who your friends are, and sticking by friends. So you see that in order to develop this code book that's in front of us, and the code book is entitled Consequences of Rumors, that we have these sort of sub-themes within them that are really renderings and categorizations of the process coding. So for our second activity related to this week's lesson, I would like you to engage in process coding exercises. So I want you to use Topher's transcript again. I'd like you to engage in first cycle coding. So I'd like you to try to go through line by line, identify as many gerunds or process coding. This also links to your reading for this week as well from Johnny Saldana. I want you to then cluster the process codes together, maybe into themes. Maybe you even find sub-themes within those themes. And after you do that, again, 8-minute free writing exercise using your phone to time you, and just try to look at one sort of cluster of process codes together that you have developed into a theme, and try to work on your thematic analysis. So if you get stuck, ask yourself, what is happening here in the data with the participants' very words, and what does it mean? Okay. So just try that out, and just remember, you are still a beginner. You're still moving through this. This is just a chance for you to try out these skills on a real data set. Okay, so what do we do next? Let's say we've coded and coded and coded, and we've clustered and categorized. How do we really further deepen our analysis? We want to think about coding decisions and coding outcomes. So we kind of are in that initial breaking in period, but eventually that will pass once you get really good at qualitative data analysis. You should feel comfortable applying your code. So what you want to do is kind of come up with a really nicely conceptualized code book. So I recommend to my students not having more than 12 to 15 codes, like major codes with definitions. And then you can look over your entire data set. Let's say you have 20 participants, you use that code book to go through all your transcripts. And that point, coding becomes easy because you're just moving through and you're marking your transcripts with your code book. Okay. So as you're applying the coding methods to your data, you should also be simultaneously taking breaks and writing memos. You should feel like you're making new discoveries, having insights, really learning about connections to your participants' processes and the phenomenon under investigation, which is your research question. Always return to your research question. Okay. So after this first cycle coding, what can we really do to deepen our analysis? I always love to look into word clouds. So you can do word clouds, actually, even with your transcripts, just enter them all in and you kind of look at words that stick out and they're weighted. So the weight is linked to the frequency. So bullying is the most commonly used word in this data set that Johnny Saldana is using. Other than LGBTQ, sexual identity is also a very heavy hitting word. You can also do this with your codes after you've coded your entire data set. So that lets you know about frequency. But my one word of warning here is don't let frequency override significance. So we're looking for frequency and significance in our qualitative data analysis. So remember what I said during our first session together? We often also pay attention to the outliers. So somebody can share with you something that is significant, but not always frequent. So we always attend to frequency. So the patterns, the number of times something is being talked about, let's say bullying. Oh, bullying's coming up again. Bullying's coming up again. But somebody might tell you something quite significant that we don't want to rule out just because it's not frequent. So code landscaping is a way to kind of just conceptualize our data. We can use code landscaping. That's another way to maybe organize our data based on frequency and categorization that helps us develop themes and sub-themes. A more higher level task could be we use our landscaped codes to develop a narrative outline. So we can actually cut and paste our transcripts into narrative outline. We can write around our narrative outline using analytic memos. And this helps us really attune to patterns, findings, themes, conceptualization, what's common, what's frequent, what's significant. We can look at code charting. This is another analytic exercise where we really separate using a table. We look at across our participants, then we have kind of a summary using observation or looking over their transcript, and then we look at what's their primary code. This kind of gives us a profile of each of our participants and helps us as researchers really understand characteristics that stood out. Ian Day has developed a strategy called code and category branching. This is really another form of diagramming. It helps us look at linkages and connection between our data, but you need to do this after establishing a really well-developed code book. We can also use operational model diagramming. So this is an example from Saldana's book that looks at culture shock and adaptation. So we can see that there's sort of a looping together between different stages and phases of culture shock and adaptation, which is illustrated. So you can have it as a diagram, but then you want to write about it. So now what? So this is a great time after you've done all these diagramming exercises, clustering, conceptualizing, asking yourself, what have I gotten right? Have I learned anything new? What is the big picture? And what do I write about? Because remember, knowledge dissemination and generating new knowledge should always be our goal. So we want analytic outcomes. So for this class, I'd like you to focus, since we're considered novice qualitative researchers and you're thinking forward to your capstone project or your research projects coming up. Once you've applied these first cycle methods, that's really the coding. So that's descriptive coding or in vivo coding or process coding several times. You should have one of several, and then the second cycle coding, sorry, the diagramming, the code landscaping. You should have one or several major categories or major themes. So if you're writing an academic paper, I usually like to recommend reporting on, let's say, 5 different themes in your data. Later on, in more advanced qualitative data analysis and other courses I teach across the university, you might want to think about moving your categories and themes to propositions, assertions. This really gets into claim making around our data. We can use matrices and diagrams. We might want to look at some key concepts. We might even develop a theory grounded in data, or a primary and maybe secondary narrative. Let's say we're taking a more narrative approach. But those are more, let's say, complex strategies that take maybe a very specific stance and approach. For the sake of this class and at this point of your career, just really stick to thematic analysis. So when thinking about developing themes or categories and making assertions about your data, what you really want to reflect on are what are the perceptions of your participants, what are their perspectives about your research subject matter, what are their experiences, their lived experiences, attitudes, belief, reasons, impact, what are the barriers and facilitators to your topic at hand, motivations for retentions, interventions, limitation. This works well with evaluation and assessment of efficacy or success of, et cetera, et cetera. So when reporting on your analytic outcomes, look at this vocabulary list and try to see which one of these themes really resonate with you. And that can really help you shape your analysis. It's sort of like a shortcut kind of cheat sheet. I teach an entire course on Cactus computer-assisted qualitative data analysis software. Of all of you, do not need to use qualitative data analysis software at all. Like I said earlier, some of the best qualitative researchers don't. I just want you to have a running list of the ones that I think are really helpful. Some of them are actually also free. I really like Deduce. I find that also to be the most affordable option working with students. I've also did my dissertation using Atlas TI. I've also worked a lot with Vivo, which is very user-friendly, but quite expensive. The reason why I like to use Deduce, which is the third one on the list, is that it's all web-based. So I work a lot with teams in California and Chicago and Vietnam even. We can all code the same data set at the same time. So we don't have to really pass files between us. So that's one of the other benefits of Deduce too. But look more deeply into those. And also, you have my contact information at the end of this presentation, so feel free to reach out if you want more information about Cactus or computer-assisted qualitative data analysis software. Okay, I would be remiss and ashamed of myself if I didn't leave you with one last final resources, which is the CoRec checklist. So as a qualitative methodologist, one of my big kind of thrusts of my career is trying to do rigorous qualitative research. So there have been items related to rigor that have developed as kind of guidelines. And these are guidelines that help us kind of separate a poorly constructed and executed qualitative study from a very advanced, nuanced, in-depth qualitative study. So I am going to assign you this reading just so if you choose to embark on a qualitative capstone or research project in the future, you can look at these guidelines. So it's items to develop rigor. So how do we work with teams? How many participants should we have in our study? What can we do in qualitative data analysis to build rigor, and how do we report on that rigor? What can we do with the qualitative data collection part of this, when we're interviewing participants, when we're gathering data, when we're maybe using observational data, how do we really get into trustworthiness and dependability of our data? And how do we prove that to a scientific audience? So look at these 32 items, see if you can incorporate them into your future projects. A lot of journals I publish in now actually require that I submit this checklist along with my articles to just prove that I am in alignment with some of these standards related to criteria for reporting on qualitative studies. So please take that in as well. And I'm going to leave you. I've had so much fun teaching you over the past couple of weeks around qualitative data analysis. And I'd like to leave you with a poem from Harry F. Wolcott, who is another famous qualitative methodologist. So he says, only understanding matters. We must not just transform our data, we must transcend them. Insight is our forte. The whole purpose of the enterprise is discovery and revelation. We do it to be profound. So on that note, thank you for working with me this week, and I hope you have a fun time working on your found poetry, practicing gerunds, practicing clustering to develop thematic analyses, and I hope you have a great rest of the semester. All right, everyone, take care. Bye.